Hey everyone, this is Jay Stein, and this is the Intelligent Investor Chart of the Week, where we're basically going to look at different fantasy football charts every week. And we're going to talk about your favorite dynasty assets and whether they're buys, sells, or holds. And this week we're going to talk about Cam Akers, why I think he's a hold from a dynasty perspective, but there's a tactical trading opportunity for you. Let's get to work. Yeah, so first off, I just want to talk about, this is not a discussion about whether Cam Akers is good or not. I'll leave that to professionals. But it's important to say that Cam Akers suffered one of the worst industry injuries a running back can have in the NFL, where he tore his Achilles. And he made it back, and the end of this season was pretty remarkable. So I just say, first off, very happy for what he's been able to accomplish and get back on the field and return to true form there. And so we're very happy for him. But my process is not about whether he's good or bad. What I'm looking at is valuation. And basically the way I do that is compare a player's KTC to his fantasy points per game. And we're basically looking at price charts of what happened in the past and seeing what that could tell us about what happened in the future. And KTC, that's KeepTradeCut. That is a website that uses crowdsourcing by the people that visit the site, answering whether they would keep, trade, or cut players. They use an algorithm, they come up with a value for each one of the players, and they use that in their rankings and their trade calculators. And basically what we're using that as our currency. If we were in the stock market, we'd be talking about dollars. For my purposes for fantasy football, we're using KTC as the currency, the dollars. And we're doing that, and we're putting them in charts. So last week we talked about Kyle Pitts. This week we're going to talk about Cam Akers. So this is, if you remember last week, this is the same chart that we had for Kyle Pitts. This is Cam Akers KTC chart. Lots of lines, lots of circles. The blue line represents what Cam Akers' price or his KTC has been over time. The red line that goes through the center, the red dash line, that's his average KTC over time. That's around 5,000 KTC. And then there's plus or minus one standard deviation. And then there's purple shaded areas. Those are the fantasy season. So that's weeks 1 through 17 or 1 through 18 for the second two shaded areas. But the white areas represent basically the playoffs and the off season for those players. This is just his KTC over time. And so, what I want to talk about is, how Cam Akers started as a Ram, as a second round pick, and he started in the KCC chart here around 5,700. And, he has a pretty decent first season. You can see that first season, his KTC sort of moves down quickly and then moves back up quickly. And that first week of his debut playoff for that first season he had, that's that first yellow circle. He had a really good game there. And so you can see his sort of KTC is falling along with his performance on the field. He ended up that first year, his rookie season was 625 yards in 13 games. And by that offseason, people were discussing whether Cam Akers is the RB1. He's young. He seems to be pretty good, although he hadn't put up the fantasy points per game quite yet during the season for people to take advantage of. They were pretty excited about what he could be. And then come that off season, come around July, mid-July, he ends up tearing his Achilles. Very, very sad moment. That's the black circle. And you can see within the span of a few days, his KTC moves from that black circle to the green circle, from the top end of the range to the bottom of the range. That green circle, if you were strong enough in your convictions, was a very good buy opportunity, because this injury that for running backs that nobody comes back from, or if they do come back, they don't have fantasy relevant success. Cam Akers comes back in 6 months from. He ends up coming back. He ends up playing the last game of the regular season for the Rams, and then through the 4 games of their playoff run where they end up becoming Super Bowl champs. And you can see right after that purple shaded area, Cam Akers KTC sort of shoots up there. And then that through that whole offseason, it kind of hovers around 5,000 KTC, which is about his average, where his average has been. So that's pretty significant through the offseason. And then as we get into this 2022 season, you can see his KTC drops off, and that's basically we're in a running back by committee here, where Darrell Henderson takes a lot of the carries, and Cam Akers isn't putting up fantasy points per game, and you can see his KTC suffers. It got bad for a little bit. The Rams were considering trading Cam Akers. There was rumors that there were a couple of offers that were made for him, but nothing good enough that they made the Rams want to take the offer. So Cam Akers remained on the team. And then there were a couple of weeks where he was inactive for personal reasons right after that. So the situation got pretty bad, pretty dire. The Rams season didn't end up actually being what they were expecting or thought it could be. And so, not playing, not having a lot of opportunity, not putting up very many fantasy points per game. You can see his KTC has drifted all the way down to the 2,000 range, actually just under 2,000, to the point where in KTC is not worth much of anything from that perspective. And then, some things happens. There are some coaching shifts in the Rams organization. Darrell Henderson gets cut, waived, and then their opportunity arises, and Cam Akers fills into that Rams RB1 role and has a really, really, really good back half of the season. Basically, since week 13 on, he's been one of the better performing Dynasty running backs. And he's still young. He's still 23 years old this year. And you can see, just looking at this chart, we had the last two yellow circles. When you cross through that lower bound, you're in this point of warning and caution where the floor could drop out. And I'd say that's about what happened. The floor kind of dropped out on him. But then he worked his way back from the doldrums of nothingness, and now he's crossing that threshold again, that 37 KTC, that lower -1 standard deviation, which is a good sign, a very, very good sign for Cam Akers. So that's sort of looking at this first chart. And I said chart of the week, but I'm going to give you some bonus charts here. A little surprise here. I was trying to keep this series to 5 minutes or less, but for me, it's hard to stop talking sometimes. So we're going to look at a couple new charts here. This is the blue line is Cam Akers chart again. So nothing's changed with the blue line. That's the same chart. The red line is 150-day moving average. And it's basically the red line starts 150 days into the series, right? So what this is telling me is it basically smooths his line out over time. And when the red line's in a positive upward trajectory and the blue line's above it, that's a very good scenario for Cam Akers. That's where you can see multiple expansion from a PE perspective. That's the intelligent investor type stuff. And when you have that blue line then cross through the red line, that's a warning signal. That's like something could happen here. And we saw that happen right before the injury. Actually, quite a few months before the injury, his blue line crossed through his red line. And that is definitely a warning signal of a price fall that could happen. And we saw that through the injury. That happened another time in this series. But right now, what I draw your attention to is the very right part of the chart where his blue line has crossed through the red line from a positive perspective, right? So now what we want to see for the most ideal buying opportunity is you'd want to see that red line sort of flatten out and start ticking up. And once that happens, you're feeling really good about where Cam Akers' price trajectory is going. There's one other thing I want to add to this chart. So what I did here, his blue line chart is basically a bunch of lower lows, right? So I'm connecting his blue lines, all those low lows. I'm drawing a line between those blue lines. So you say the blue line touches that gray line, the bottom end of this channel, 3 times, right? And then I take that same parallel line and I move it up to the top of the range. And so you can see here, this is sort of a downward price channel for Cam Akers. Not so great from a stock perspective. But what this tells me here is as his blue line starts moving up into the average KTC, which we talked about is around 5,000, if it even gets up there. As it gets to the upper part of this channel, so wherever that is during that time, so if it gets to, let's say it's 5,700 or 5,500 or something like that, as it bounces up against the top end of this channel, I think it's going to be very hard for Cam Akers to prove that he can break through this range, this bound, this upper part of the channels. But once he does, then again, if he does, that's going to be a very, very, very good signal. So we'll go back up here to this chart. This is kind of the main chart. This is how we're sort of describing things. But from a fundamentals perspective, if you think of Cam Akers, and he hasn't been able to show this throughout the season, but if you think of him as a 14 to 15 fantasy points per game guy, and you give him a PEV around a 35, which is very comparable to the top end of the running backs from a dynasty perspective, then his KTC range price target should be around 4,600 to 5,200. That's if he can get to those levels. Now, I'm not here in the business of telling you that he can get to the 14.5 fantasy points per game, or if he's at 12 fantasy points per game, and we don't know. There's lots of things that are going to happen until then, but he does have the possibility, and it is very possible that he gets back up to that 5,000 KTC range, or a KTC that he's averaged over time. And for him to do that coming back from an injury is pretty amazing. So from a trading tactical perspective, how are we thinking about this? So I am not, given the downward channel of this price, I am not as confident in Cam Akers as I am in a Kyle Pitts. So he's not on my top buy list, but there is upside here in his price. And so right now he's trading for like an early 2023 second. And if you can buy him for less than that even makes this equation even better. But what you could do from a tactical perspective is, if you can get him for less than an early 2023 second, and then his price appreciates to somewhere where we think he can in the average of around 4,600 to 5,200, so around 5,000 or 4,700. There is 33% upside from current levels to get to that range, to get to that area, or about 1,000 more KTC of upside left to go. Now, the problem is, and I've learned this in my Intelligent Investor series, is, you got to think about where the catalysts are. So he's finished his fantasy season, and unfortunately, the Rams are not in the playoffs. So he's not going to get a chance to, get out on the field and put up yards and statistics. So basically, you're left with this void of no positive catalysts that are on the horizon. But I do think that the Twitter machine, given how well his back half of the season in, will start clicking, start getting into motion. And I think his KTC price will drift up over time. The thing is that you have to be very cognizant of what are the negative catalysts that are on the horizon. So you have the NFL offseason, you have free agency, and the NFL draft. And so when I think about what could happen in those time frames is, potentially another good or semi-good running backs get added to the mix, and this becomes another timeshare, which would put pressure on his KTC price from ever getting back to that 5,000 range. So from a short tactical time frame, what I want to do is I want to turn your early 2023 second, or if you can buy him for less than that, like a mid 2023 second, and I want to turn it into a late 2023 first before the draft. So that doesn't necessarily always happen, right? In a lot of leagues, if you try and buy somebody for low and then a few months later flip them for something that's higher, not every league you can get that accomplished. But there are some leagues where some people can get that accomplished, and that's why I say there is this short-term tactical opportunity to take advantage of. Now, if you do own Cam Akers, I think he's a hold. I think there's price appreciation. I think I want to hold him through that price appreciation. I think he can get to that 4,600 range, which is, again, another 1,000 KTC appreciation from here. At that point, when he gets to be that late 2023 first, and even if you can get more than that, that gets to be the point where I want to look to move off of him and sell him. So that's in the future. That'd be potentially before the NFL draft even happens, is when I would want to try and move off of him. So that's the story. That's how I think about Cam Akers from a chart perspective. I know one chart of the week turned into 3, and that's usually how it goes with me. I can talk a lot about this stuff. So Thank you so much for watching. Let me know who you want to see again next week, and please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you don't know what the Devy Royale is, we have a Patreon. Come and join us. It's really great. There are a lot of great guys in there. You'll learn a lot. And if you're interested in this stuff and evaluation and the PE ratios, and you can check out my Intelligent Investor series at the Dynasty Nerds. There's one linked in the comments section of this YouTube video. And I really appreciate it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again next week. Thanks. Bye.